Okay, so today we're going to talk about hiring writers, specifically us and a bunch of people that we talk to on Twitter have a usual complaint about content marketing writers, which is obviously I can't find a good writer, and with often a lot more colorful words. And we have been doing this for, I don't know, you know how many years, but we've been doing this for many years. And we have gone through a ton of writers. And the way we run our agency, every single content strategist starts as a writer. And so, and it's all a tight knit team. We don't delegate or outsource any of our clients' content to just a Rolodex of a bunch of freelance writers. And so we really care about having really good writers, and we try to spend a ton of time on that. And we thought that a video that kind of dives into the details of how do we hire, how do we vet, and how much time and detail we spend coaching content marketers and writers so that they write in our style would be really useful. So that's what today's video is going to be about. And before we get started, if you like this video, then it would help us if you liked and or subscribed, which you can do on our YouTube channel.
Cool. I think a first good place to get started would be maybe to rewind back to when we first got started in our agency, because the first challenge that we had to overcome when we got our first client was how are we going to produce the articles? And so immediately we went to, well, I think we need some writers, and we didn't know what we were doing at that point in time. And I feel like we made the same mistake that most people do, which is they just kind of put out a job rec for a writer and they try to find people that have a similar background to what they're trying to write. And they look at the portfolio pieces and they just give them a shot. And we did that a number of times and I remember paying $1,000 for an article that we never used, and paying really extremely high prices. And I think we had to learn the hard way on everything not to do, from paying hourly rates to paying these really high prices for these subject matter expert writers. And I don't know if you remember any of the other mistakes that we made early on, but I think what might help people is to kind of just walk through all those different mistakes that we made in the very beginning of the business and then kind of contrast that to what we're doing now.
Yeah. I mean, at the very beginning, I think our solution was that we wrote them, or I just remember I wrote some, and that very quickly we were like, okay, this is not going to work.
Yeah, but we didn't try to do that. I would say
Right.
we knew immediately that we needed writers and that
Right.
we weren't going to be writing the
No,
articles.
we
But
we factored that into like a hypothetical budget, right? Like we factor that into like our costs or whatever, because anyone who's going to do a content agency, that's obvious. Yeah, so we created a job description. I have no idea what it said, but I remember we asked for a portfolio. It was in Google Forms, which we still use. And we have a Google sheet with a bajillion applicants now. But and you and I just went through the portfolio, and I remember creating a column on the left with like Benji comments, Devesh comments, and we'd be like, okay, this person's good for this, that, I don't like this one, and we would just, the key was their portfolio. I mean, we looked at other questions. Why do you want to work here? What else have you done? What's your background? And we tried to find ones that matched our, that were good. And I think in terms of mistakes, that's not a mistake. Like anyone hiring writers, that's like ticket to entry. Of course, you need to ask them for their portfolio, but we're going to get into, what should we call it? Not mistakes, but like traps.
yeah, maybe
In,
things that don't matter that you think maybe matter in the very
so
beginning.
there's this whole thing that we're going to get into, not right this second. If just you're not, turns out you can't really be sure which of the portfolio pieces was like really done by that writer in its entirety. But the other big one initially on was experience. And I think that was what led to some of the $1,000 ones where I don't know what we were paying initially, but it was like a few $100s or something.
Yeah, I think we started at $350.
Yeah.
if I remember correctly.
And we were like, oh, like when we had a couple bad ones not work out, we were like, well, maybe like it's too cheap or something, and we need to pay like the like really expensive people. Those expensive writers tend to be, maybe not even tend to be, like basically always are really experienced content marketers. That's how they know to charge that much. Anyone who's just starting off writing is like, I don't know, like a few $100s. Like, but the people who are charging $1,000, really five, I mean, I guess this was like 6, 7 years ago. So now I guess things have changed. But 700, 600 plus, they are for sure experienced. They're like on Twitter, they have a bunch of clients, they have their own website, and then the whole brand is like, I'm this content marketing writer. So we thought, okay, that's what we need. And I still remember that $1,000 one because I was
I
just
do
so
too.
flummoxed when that
Well, it was
person,
a good portion of our rate at that point in time. I think it
yeah,
was like a sixth of our
yeah,
rate. So it was a very expensive article.
yeah, and I remember just being like, well, how could we not use this? Like we paid $1,000 for this, but we just kept reading it and being like, this is not what we want. And my memory of it is that the person wasn't that receptive. I
To
think I was like,
feedback.
this
Yeah.
is not what we're trying to do. Like we're trying to do something else. And they were just like, well, like, this is not how I write, or this is not how I work, or whatever. And and then at some point I was like, okay, forget it. We need to get this submitted. And so I just wrote it. And I think that leads to this big initial learning of mine, which is, and of ours, is that really experienced content marketers and writers, they may be experienced, but that often means they're really set in how they're doing the writing and their writing style. And I've seen websites, and this is something I've commented on Twitter recently, but like I've seen websites where they say like, I'm the blah blah, this me, and I've been doing this for this many years for these companies in SaaS or whatever. And then they'll say, and I bring, this is an example, I I'm good at taking boring subjects and making them fun and funny and blah blah blah. And my pet peeve is boring B2B content actually shouldn't be funny. Like if somebody's looking for IT security software, like why are you cracking jokes and putting cat memes in it? Like it doesn't make any sense. Now I've gotten into Twitter debates about this, but whatever. I stand by what I'm saying. But this is illustrative of what I'm saying, which is, so if I, as the agency side, the hirer, want a certain style, in this example, want our hypothetical IT client's post to not have jokes and random like cutesy humor in it, and I hire an experienced writer who does do that, we're gonna butt heads. And that's going to be a pain. And it's going to be really hard to undo that because they're thinking, I'm really experienced. I charge $1,000 a post. So like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? Like, why are you editing that? And it's going to be really tedious. And that's a small, like symbolic, small, like funny example. But that is true of larger things. How intros are written. If you know anything about Grow and Convert, and we can get into it later, maybe in a different video or this one, we're very particular about how our intros are written. How much you sell the product. You and I are planning on possibly doing another video on that later. But like, to give away the ending, which is not a secret, we sell our clients' products heavily in our posts because we found that converts the most. Most experienced content marketers don't do that because like the culture of content marketing is all this like don't sell stuff. We've talked about this before. And so those are the bigger things that will come up, and then you butting heads. And so that was that's like the big takeaway number one.
Well, I feel like the larger issue there is just we were expecting content done in a certain way and the writing to be done in a certain way, and probably not communicating that enough to the writer. And so they have a completely different way
Yeah.
that they typically do writing. And unless that's communicated and we're giving a specific style of how we want something, specific examples of how we want something, I think there's often this miscommunication that happens between whoever is hiring the writers and how the writer typically does articles that goes unspoken until you get into the first draft. And then you're like, whoa, 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 what is this piece? it's way different from anything that I was expecting. And then you guys go back and forth. And then as an agency, we had a timeline that we had to meet. And so that's where we
Yeah.
didn't end up getting to use the article. But I would say that's largely an issue that I've seen even trying to hire in-house too, is whether it's an SEO article or it's opinion piece or whatever the style of article it is, there's not too much conversation or like the step that we have, which is the questionnaire, to try to understand what needs to go in the article or what the style of the article should be before you get into the writing step. And I think it often leads to bigger issues with the hiring process or just
Yeah.
producing the article.
Yeah. So that is jumping ahead, but we can talk about that. Like, that's the process once we have someone is we eventually created this questionnaire step. And I believe shout out to Nathan Collier, who's no longer with us, who I think was instrumental in getting that created. Um, it, and that's like, once you hire someone, that was the big issue. You give them this piece, or you give them the background for this piece, and then they just come up with something, and you're like, okay, like, is it good? Is it not good? And I think that's where a lot of people's frustrations are, where they're like, on Twitter complaining like it's hard to find a good writer or whatever, because you you gave them a certain amount of input, and then you had this vision in your head of what's going to come back. The input wasn't enough to create that vision. The writer has their own biases, like we talked about, and their own habits, and they came back with what they do. And then you're like, well, this sucks. And so, what are you supposed to do? And to some extent, it's not avoidable, right? Like, you're going to run into that, and by no means is the conclusion of this video going to be, and Grow and Convert has solved writer hiring. Like, it's still hard for us, but one of those things, process wise, that was important is we do this questionnaire. I think a lot of other people call it like a content brief or whatever. But the key difference, and we go into the full details of our questionnaire in our course, our like paid course and community. So I want to be a little bit careful of not sort of saying everything we say in there out of respect for people in there. But we've talked about it externally as well. The difference between a typical content brief, from what I've seen, most people content brief is focused on, how do I say this? Like, these really like details, almost what I would consider like side details of the piece. It'll be like the brief will like give like, here's the keyword, maybe they even pick the headers or something, and like how long your paragraph should be, how many examples to put in there, and these sort of details. Whereas,
Also some basic info that should just go in the article, because a lot of the briefs are instead of interviewing someone. So it's someone with the expertise might begin to create the brief, or the writer might create the brief, and they try to put the key details and information that should go in the article, and then kind of send the writer off to go produce it. Now, with this is supposed to be kind of like all the information you need to write,
yeah,
instead of the interviewing stuff.
yeah. What we do instead, our questionnaire, is it focuses on the arguments, like what you're actually saying. And that's, we don't talk about word count. We just don't deal with word count. We don't count our words. Like, people are always like, well, how long are these articles? I'm like, I don't know. Like, count the words later. Um, we don't even necessarily, like, we get into outlining it, but we have questions in there that's around like, what pain points are behind this keyword in this topic? What unique solutions does this company and this product or service offer? And how is this different from what other people are talking about? It's all about the substance of like, what are you arguing? What are you going to say in the piece? Not the details of how you are going to say it, how many H2s and how long the paragraph's going to be and all that stuff. And then it culminates in an outline, so that you know, see the final result kind of before it's final. You take those early questions of like, what are the pain points or whatever, and you culminate it in this outline. And that allows us to, the editor, who's the content strategist, and the writer, to get on the same page before this huge thing has been written and everything has been like finalized, and you're like, oh god, this is not at all what I wanted. So you can see in the outline, okay, this is how they're thinking about it. No, I want to move this here, I want to change the intro to this, we need to make sure we mention this detail, that's not right, and the order needs to be like this. All that happens in that kind of questionnaire step and that outlining step, and that's key. Side note, tying to what we talked about beforehand, there have been very experienced writers. We had this foray, which I wasn't planning on talking about, but like we tried journalists for a while, and journalists hate outlining. I learned, and so some of the experienced writers are like, I don't do this. I don't outline. I just write a draft. And you're like, okay, well, like we're not going to be a fit. So anyway, so that's process wise.
Yeah, I
How
want to get a little bit away from that. I'm sorry, I sidetracked the conversation a little bit and went there. But what I want to get back to
is
is
hiring?
the hiring process. So the mistakes that we made early on and what we learned not to do, and then contrasting that with what we're doing now and what we've learned since then. And
Yeah,
what does our writing process look like? Or sorry, not writing process, writer hiring process look like? So what do we
yeah.
do to screen candidates? What do we do once we found a candidate that has potential? So maybe let's go back and just kind of summarize what some of those mistakes were early on. I think one thing we learned is not to pay people hourly because the incentives are misaligned. I think if you pay people hourly, the writer will always do things to make it so that there's more hours, whereas the company needs a finished product.
Yeah, I
And so
mean, they
you can
may or may not, but the incentive, the financial incentive is in that direction.
Yeah. So we just found out pay structure doesn't work. So what we do now is pay a flat rate. So that's one mistake that we had made. The second mistake was just finding people that have a ton of experience on the subject matter, thinking that they're going to be a better writer on that subject matter, and learning that's not true. And we'll explain what we do differently now.
And
Any
then
other?
the third big one, which I can use to like move into what we do now. The third big one is relying on the portfolio as like the sole thing of how good they are. And
Yeah.
look, like sometimes the portfolio, there are some, like I have a particular writer in mind that was amazing that we don't work with anymore, sadly. His portfolio, immediately I read it and I was like, we need to hire him. And he was indeed like really good. But it's not a telltale sign. We've also recently had a writer that didn't work out and her portfolio was amazing. So anyway, so that last one, let's continue that, right? So previous, we had just like had an application, had a portfolio, looked at it, and we said, let's do it, and then put them on a paid piece. So let's start with that last part. We just put them right in a paid piece and it caused all these issues. What we do now instead is test and vet them with these two steps after we see the portfolio, before they're even on a real client piece. Why? Because a real client piece has to be submitted to a client on a deadline. And if it doesn't work out and the writer is not good, that is really stressful for everyone. And so very quickly we were like, no, it is worth it to pay applicants, pay them to do a test piece that is not, it's the same prompt. We've had like 400 of these, it feels like. I don't know, the real number is not 400. And so it's not useless. We don't do anything with it, right? We've had everyone write about the same thing almost.
Well, that was actually a mistake that we did make, was we tried to have different writing prompts because we felt
Yeah.
like if there was one writing prompt, someone could go see the finished piece that was already live,
Right.
and then they were gonna, I don't know, cheat somehow. But
Yeah.
what happened when we try to use different writing prompts and then judge the ability of the writer based on the different writing prompts is there was no benchmark.
Yeah.
And so
We were like,
it
oh,
would.
this one's a lot harder than the previous one. Is that why it's not as good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now what we have is one prompt. And do you want to explain what the prompt is a little bit?
Yeah. So I
We
think to get into that, we have to explain like the kind of writing we do, which is if you haven't watched any of our previous videos, then this will be new. If you have, like, this won't be, but I'll be fast. Is we do bottom of the funnel pieces, which means we're writing pieces targeting SEO keywords that are product related. We call it high buying intent or bottom of the funnel. Things like, I always use accounting as an example. My mind, it seems easy for everyone to understand, is like best accounting software would be a keyword we go after, and that naturally needs to discuss product and features. And if your, our client would be hypothetically an accounting software provider, discuss their product and features and how it's better versus what? Versus like how to do, small business accounting tips, which is very like what typically people do, which is this mid top of the funnel stuff, which is just like general collection of tips. So because we do this bottom of the funnel, our writing needs to be very matter of fact. No fluff. We're not trying to entertain them. Like, people are Googling these things to like, because they're thinking about buying stuff. And what else is on page 1 is like a bunch of comparisons, and it's like a very I always use the term like utilitarian search. Like I'm like trying to do something and buy something and research something, not like small business accounting tips. I'm like just trying to like figure out how this works or whatever. So the writing needs to have that, is like this really clear, matter of fact, like clarity, no fluff to it. Now, the second characteristic it needs is the ability for the writer to understand value propositions, benefits, features, differentiators of those features and benefits versus competition, and be able to write that in a compelling way. So they need to be able to do like a little bit sales writing or sales copywriting, right? So absolute clarity, no fluff, sales copywriting. That's what we're looking for. On the surface, not too complicated. In practice, very difficult
Okay.
to find. And so the first thing we did after the first thing we did is create a test project. And what is that? Is the prompt you asked me, and this is my long way of answering it, is like we have a recorded interview. I think it's like a demo of one of our clients who has it's like a SaaS client, some software, and we have them watch or listen to it. Actually, I think it's listen, watch anyway,
Yeah,
and
it's
then
watch.
do our questionnaire, which asks these questions like, what are the pain points, like what keyword, whatever. We tell them what keyword this is going to be after, and then outline it. And we ask them in the outline to write out the intro fully. And that's the extent of the test project. They don't have to do the whole draft. And we pay them. I forget what we pay them now, like something $150, $100, something like that.
150,
And
I think.
and 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 the intro, we asked them like fully write that out, because that's really important to us, because that should set up, okay, this software, let me just continue my accounting hypothetical. That should set up, how are they going to angle and position our client's hypothetical accounting software? Okay, most accounting software does X, like small businesses have these pain points. You should be looking for Y, that kind of thing. Can they do that? Or do they have certain writing habits that is completely incompatible with us? For example, a lot of writers will start every piece on this kind of like friendly infomercially kind of tone of like, oh, you like this kind of fake story tone. Running a small business is really hard. After you've done HR and sold customers and provided the customer, you sit down after a long day. Now you got to do the books. Like that's like the typical writing style. Like, but we don't do that. Like we'd be like, no, that doesn't work at all. And so we want to see that, and you can see that immediately in an intro. And that then, so that it's a paid test project. We give that to them. It's now, like you said, standardized. It's the same client. We've done it for a bajillion writers, and we get it back. We typically do one round of revisions. We typically, even if they come back with something that's like, whoa, like the example I just gave, we don't just like nix them. And we're not like, sorry, it's not going to work out immediately. Because what we've noticed, and we've had some really successful team members on our team today, that their first thing they came back with, we were like, ugh, and then we gave them feedback, and then it was amazing. So we've noticed that that's a key characteristic. The people who work out with us, they can respond to that feedback, because sometimes at the beginning, the instructions weren't clear or whatever. And so we give them one round. That feedback can be in text comments. Like the guy who's in charge of it now, David, and our team, he tends to do it in actual like Google Doc comments, like long comments. I tend to do it in recorded video. I use like a recorded Loom video. It can be whatever. And we explain, like, listen, we don't do that flowery intro, because think about it. Like, remember, we talked about this, like, person who's Googling this, they don't need to be told that. They're already looking for accounting software, etc. Or like, this sentence could be said in a simpler way. What about this pain point to introduce this feature, whatever. And we see what comes back. And that's really it. That's the bulk of it. That test project is dramatic. There's no timeline, because it's not a real piece. So there's no stress. It doesn't affect our content strategists who are like, I'm just trying to get this work done for this client in October or whatever, right? And we can kind of take our time with it and see how they do. And if they pass, regardless of whether they pass or fail, we pay them. And then if they pass, we then put them on their first real piece. And I can talk about coaching there, but I'll take a break.
Yeah. Let's take a break and just kind of summarize, because I think there's two key learnings in there. One is creating a test project that maps to what you would have them do in the role. So I would even say the test project that we're saying might not even be the best for whatever type of writing that you're doing. We took a while to think
Yeah.
through what would be the test project that best maps to our own writing process and our own writing style, and then tested a few different prompts and then found one that worked going forward. And then the second key learning that I heard was the editing part. So being able to give someone feedback and seeing if they can then go make the piece better, because we've had a lot of people where they showed a lot of potential, and then when we tried to give them the feedback, the piece got worse, or they weren't willing to take the feedback and they kind of pushed back.
Yeah.
And it's just not a good writer that we would want to work with if they fall into that camp. I don't know if you have anything more to say on
No,
that.
I want to add to your point one. Point one, you said have the test peep map to what you're doing. I want to say that statement even stronger. Have it be literally what you're going to ask them to do. That should be clear. The test project is a real piece that I think we wrote. Like
it was, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but it was written and published like a year and a half ago, so it's done. We don't need their work. Like that's not the point. But it's like that's literally what we're gonna ask them. And so if you're doing, like, you make a good point. What our test project is may not be yours. You may be doing ultimate guides, ebooks. Think through, if I were to hire them to write my ultimate guide or ebook, what information would they be equipped with? Maybe for you, now I would not agree with this writing process, but it could be true, and it probably is true for a lot of companies. Maybe you don't equip them with anything. Maybe you're just like, here's the keyword, like, do what you need to do. But like, think through exactly what am I going to ask them and test that exact thing.
Yeah. So if you had more of a story-based style approach to writing, more journalistic style, have them listen to a 30-minute or hour-long interview and then write basically what the angle would be for that story. What are the most interesting points that came out of that interview? Something like that. So
Yeah.
again, having an approach that maps to your own writing process. And I think that's really important, because a lot of people have tried to take our exact writing prompt or our exact process, and it just doesn't work, because we have a very specific style of writing that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And not every company writes in the same style as us. So you're not testing the writers for what you need them to do. And I think that's
Yeah.
a really important thing here.
And the other thing is that bridges from the portfolio to your job request, because the portfolio, most writers' portfolios is not bottom of the funnel pieces, because most people don't do that. Most clients don't ask for that. And so they're writing like who knows what. And we're looking in the portfolio for some of these characteristics. We're looking for the clarity. We're looking for them being able to break down a complex topic. But the portfolio piece could be whatever. And this bridges. You're like, okay, we liked your portfolio. But before we put you on a real piece, let's see how those skills translate to doing the real piece the way we do it. So that's number one. Now, the second part of this filtering is we just kept improving. So this helped a lot, but still these situations arose where someone came through, we thought their portfolio was awesome. They did a great on their test piece, and I was like, they're for sure going to work out. Like, and I would slack you, because I'd be so excited when we find good writers. I'd be like, Benji, there's this person, like, it's amazing. You're like, great. And then we give them to some strategists. A week passes, the strategist DMs me on Slack and is like, this is really not working out. Like, where did you find this person? And I'm like, what do you mean?
That's an important point too, because I think it's important to talk about what we used to do versus what we do now. So now we have this test project that's a siloed test project, completely separate from any piece that we would write for a client. Yeah. Historically, the mistake that we made was after they passed this first step, and we felt like they were a good enough writer, then we were just giving them to an existing strategist and say, like, basically putting them into a real live piece for a client.
Yeah.
And that created a whole bunch of headaches, because the strategist would sometimes get a writer who's great, and sometimes get a writer who ended up, once you get into the real project, really not working out. Either the writing was way off from the test project, or they couldn't accept feedback well, or anything like that. And then it created all sorts of fires in the agency because you have a piece that needs to be done on a specific deadline, and the writer is not good and the strategist gets frustrated. And so now the whole writing, testing, and vetting process is completely separate from any of our real live client work.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still in that scenario. So I'm still at that part of the story. So they passed a test project. We hand them to a writer. So that's literally the story that I'm still in. I know where you're going, and I'll get there in a second.
Okay.
So then they come back and they're like, what the heck, man? Like, Davish, like, it's like the 28th of the month, and I got to get this in, and this is horrible. And now I have to rewrite it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, And I'm like, what happened? And so we'll get into there's multiple solutions that we have been adding to try to help that. You're getting into like how we now help coach during that first piece. But before we get there, there was this other thing we added, which is we were like, this kept happening. We were like, what the hell? Their portfolio was amazing, or we thought it was. Their test piece was pretty, or I think that there's actually two scenarios that cause this. Sometimes the portfolio would be amazing and their test piece would be horrible. And we were like, what the, like, how did you possibly write these articles in your portfolio and your test piece is this bad? Or just, yeah, whatever. Maybe that's the one. We then added a question in our application, and you may, as you're listening to this, if you're a writer, you may object to this. And there have been some people that pushed back, but whatever, and I'll defend it. That simply asks them to do a little bit of writing on the fly right then. Like, for real. And the pushback that you may be thinking this as you're listening to this is like, oh, you're asking for free work. I'm like, not really. Like, we're not going to use it. You know what I mean? And so we just say, we give them a site of our client. We're like, here, this is one of our clients. We literally give them the site. We're like, this is the site. Check out some of the material on there and write a paragraph or two about what, like, selling the software. It's really open-ended. And we
Well,
just,
and
because we
the
know.
way that I would defend it is this is in lieu of an interview. So in writing, you're not going through a traditional interview where someone gets to
Right.
ask you questions on strategy and how you would think about solving this problem. We're hiring for a writing role. And so this is the closest that we can get to being able to test and challenge someone about how they
Yeah.
would think and then execute on that
Yeah.
specific prompt.
Yeah, it's a coding challenge. Isn't it coding interviews? I'm not a coder. I haven't gone through them, but I have friends and family. They're like studying for them. You get into this thing, you have to like whiteboard. Like, this is the equivalent of that. It's just right on the fly. Why? Because you can't make that up, right? You've never seen that before. So it's not like, oh, it was edited by my client or my editor, now it looks amazing, but I can't actually write like that. Like, no, you're like Bear. You're just like, do it right here, right? And so that has been key. That was one thing. So that helps us get more test projects passed. So that was this other step. So already, if we just recap, what are we contrasting to? Step earliest, like step, what we're contrasting to, what we used to do is just, you ask some fluff questions, and then there's like portfolio, and you just are like, this portfolio looks good, and you just throw them on a real piece that you have to do for your real work. A lot of problems. We have now two steps to help. First, in addition to the portfolio, ask them to just do something close to what you're asking them. Just like write on something, short, and 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 that immediately tests, like, is the portfolio total BS or not. Then second, for the ones that pass both of those, then have a paid test project. So at this point, you're asking them to do a significant amount of work. I think ethically you need to pay them. We pay them. Paid test project that is separate from your normal work, ideally, if you can afford it, and that really like is like, okay, now a deep dive into like, this is exactly how we work, and then only pass the people through there. So now we're at like a pretty well filtered group, and then I think this is where
Do
you
you
were
do you
going.
have do you have do you have a sense of just the numbers? Because I think that would be interesting to people. Like
Oh,
how many
great
how many
question.
people make it through that initial questionnaire to the test project?
So let me start even one uh, questionnaire. You mean the application?
Yeah, application.
I,
Sorry,
I could be really wrong in this, but I feel like from the applicants, it may be 1 in
it's 10,
20.
right? Oh wow,
Yeah.
1 in 20.
It may
Okay.
be 1 in 10 now, I think, for David, but like, it could be even higher than, it could be even Smaller than that. It could be 1 in 20, but it's something around that. 1 in 10 feels really high. 10% seems high. It might be more like 1 in 20. But that's a great question. I have not quantified that. But you got to go through a lot. Like it's like emotionally, it's exhausting because you just are going through these applicants, and at least for me, my emotions are like this next one. This is gonna be it, and you're like hoping for like an amazing application, right? Because the goal is you want to find good writers, and you read them,
When
and
you're
sometimes
reviewing, oh, go ahead, keep going.
you're just reading these portfolio pieces sometimes, and you're just like, oh god. And then you go to the next one, you're like, and you go to the next one, and then sometimes you're just like, is this ever gonna work? Then you find one that's really good, and you're like, oh my god, they're amazing. What were you gonna ask?
Yeah, when you're reviewing the applications, is there something specific that you're looking for? So when you're going, it's that 1 in 10 or 1 in 20. What's the indication to you that they're gonna be a good writer or make it to the test project?
Yeah,
Like
before
what are
we
you looking for? I'm curious.
yeah, it's the same things I said before, is like um clarity, like this is gonna sound so generic and obvious, but first of all, does the writing like make sense? Like so much content marketing writing, it just is like words on a page that don't have a point. It'll be like, what is accounting? Companies have finances and they sell things and people give them money. And then, it's like you're just like kind of discussing the topic loosely. Like, are they, is there any evidence that they're arguing a point, like defending a thesis statement, right? Like, have they done that? That's one. And then second, I think, is there any complexity to this point? So the second issue is so much writing and portfolios is the most basic stuff. This is what digital marketing is. A website has traffic, and you're like, anyone could write on a topic this simple. And is there any level of layers to like complex? Is there any evidence that they've been able to mentally grapple with a complex topic? And then finally, then like, well, I guess that's the first point, but I was going to say, is the writing clear? So do they make a point? Is it on any level of complexity? And then is it written in a clear way? That's what I'm looking for in the portfolio. And then after we enter that last question now that we have, where it's like this little mini sample, we look for that there as well. So those are those two early filters. Now, what Benji said earlier is, after the test project, we did something that makes a lot of sense. And you may think that's normal, is we put them on a real project. I said that we do that. What he's talking about is, even after those two filters, still there's writers that don't work out. In fact, I would argue maybe the majority still don't work out, which is amazing.
Then I would say it's probably 1 in 10, right? 1 in 10 that do a test project end up writing for us.
Long term, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they're like, depending on the month or the year, maybe sometimes we 1 in 5 or whatever. I don't know if that rate fluctuates, but yeah. God, I would hope it's more than 1 in 10, but this is tough. And maybe that's by the way, that's a big theme we talked about before we started recording this, is like a big theme of this. If we go back to the beginning of this recording, and I'll get back to what we were talking about, I promise, is yes, finding good writers is hard. One of the big themes of this video is you need to be clear of what you want. We said, do a test project exactly what you want. Look for exactly what you want. But the big other one is, it takes work. It takes coaching. Like we're not even at the coaching step of our process. We're just talking about filtering. And already we're talking about reviewing these applications carefully, looking at this sample project, sample is not even a project, in the writing application. Then having them do a test project, giving them detailed feedback on the test project, and giving them one more chance to do it right. Like, there's just human hours, employee hours spent doing that. You can't escape that. I don't see how you can escape that. Think about any complex role. If McKinsey is hiring a consultant or whatever, like, they spend time filtering for those things. If any company is hiring a CEO, they spend a bajillion amount of time like trying to filter for that. At least I would hope so. So that's a big theme there. So continuing on that theme, what we ended up doing is we still had stuff not work out. And our strategists, apologies to them in hindsight, is they'd be frustrated, like, I got to redo this. I am on a deadline. What are you doing? You're sending me these writers that can't write. As we started, me and David, who like kind of are doing this, and largely in the past 6 months, just David, shout out to him, is we would basically be the first line of editing on that first real piece for people who pass the test project. That's why I gave that little rant right now before this. That
As
is,
opposed to what?
as opposed to the strategist just being the editor themselves. And that is straight employee hours, human time. There's no escaping that. Like, yes, we have an extra person, David, that can like edit before the strategist edits to hopefully and give more feedback. The strategist just trying to like get stuff done, right? But he can like
And
coach
and
and
what
have a
is he
call.
looking for, or what are you looking for in that first pass of an edit on a new writer?
Same thing. I mean, we're looking for the same thing as, well, first it's the questionnaire. And the questionnaire is, were they able to, so side note for people that don't know this, basically every single one of our pieces is based on an interview with someone in the client organization that knows about the product, knows how it compares in the context of that keyword or whatever, right? So the accounting software, there'd be someone on marketing or product that can speak to all the key reasons why, their accounting software is like the best or whatever. And that's an essential part of our process. So the first thing we're looking for is in the questionnaire, could they take that interview and maybe some of our kickoff call recordings, actually, now that I think about it, and pick the right pain points, pick the right like differentiators, present the intro in the right way, have the structure of the outline correct. And that's like big thing number one. It's like an expanded version of the test project. There's evidence by that point, because they passed the test project, there's evidence that they probably can, but they can't always. Maybe the test project was too easy. I don't know. And so that's the first thing. And then when they get to so then there's back and forth on that. The strategist is the expert, not David or me on that product. And so they'll add some feedback. No, this feature actually is this side note, and you need to emphasize this other thing, and blah, blah, blah. So they'll add feedback there. And then David will kind of like coach with them and say, hey, like, the way you're presenting this, we don't really write like this. So often the strategist is giving more of the kind of like content product feedback, and David is trying to filter out for the strategist the writing feedback. People come in with their old bad habits and the story type intro and stuff we don't do, and then we're like, we don't really do this. You can say it in this other way. Like, isn't this clearer, etc. And then all of that continues in the draft stage. And that honestly, I think he does that now for multiple pieces. And that transition out of when a new writer graduates from having David be the writer to just like working directly with strategists, that's variable. I think at least he does 2 pieces, and you start to see it. Like the ones that are good, immediately you're like, this is awesome. And the strategists on our side are like, can I have them for all of my pieces? I actually have this other account where I'd like to use them as well. Because like once you find a good writer, anyone wants them, right? And it starts to become clear, and then they just start working with the strategist, on a particular account, become an expert there, and things go well. And then the other ones, there's just more calls, more feedback, more back and forth, and if the feedback's given via video, more video, and then they either are improving and continue, or we hit a wall and we're like, we gave it a good shot. And we go our separate ways. And that is, again, symbolic of this big theme of this video and our opinion on this matter, which is you can't escape. If you want to hire good writers that impress you and wow you and are amazing, and we have those, we have a team full of those. Our team is amazing. You can't escape the level of work and coaching. And David now has made it into processes, but you started off talking about how we used to do things back in the day. I mean, just back when it was just like me on the writing side. And by the way, the reason Benji's asking me this is like our 2 role splits is that I handle a lot of this writing and hiring writers and editing. I just remember like so many like Zoom calls and phone calls and like hours just like walking through how we structure a piece and like helping them through it and saying, what about this? It sounds like what you're saying is this, and we need to talk about it in this way. over and over again. And a lot of those were for writers that didn't end up working out. And that's just like time I spent. But a lot of them were also for writers that did work out. And so it's time well spent in that regard. Those human hours, we can't, I don't know of a way to escape them.
Yeah, I think a key point that you just brought up too is not building processes too early. I think that's just a general business thing that we've learned is in the beginning we tried to build a whole hiring process, and there was just so much that we didn't know about how we wanted to hire and what worked.
Yeah.
And it was only once you figured out, okay, we're starting to see some patterns in what's working, then building process around that. Same with the training stuff, building the training processes and trying to figure out how to train people. Like I remember in the very beginning of our business building a whole like training manual that was never used because we also didn't know what we were doing back then. And
Yeah.
you had to learn through trial and error what worked and what didn't work. And
Yeah.
only once you figured out what worked and the process was somewhat repeatable do you build the actual process around it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good general takeaway. And I think what I've seen in other aspects when we've sort of said these things publicly and people give us feedback and send us emails is people have like analysis paralysis. Like they may watch this and be like, okay, so I got to get this application. I got to figure out what my test project is. I got to do all this stuff. Like, yeah, that's true, but I wouldn't stress too hard about these things. Like, start somewhere, and then you can see what's happening. Oh, okay, this is working. I'm filtering well. It's working, and then if not, you get an idea and just test it and then go with the idea. Like, none of this is set in stone. You can change an application form pretty easily. So, test project, don't think too hard. It's like get an example that is very close to what you ask them to do day to day. Like that, how can that be that hard? Because it's by definition is day to day work. And just put it on there. Because I went through a bunch of test samples, and some of them were harder than others, but like it still filters. And then for the other writing sample, like just pick a question, and you just keep going, and you come up with an idea like, I wonder if this thing would do it, and iterate that as fast as possible, and keep trying that way.
What would you say if the person hiring wasn't a writer or didn't have the skill set? Because we've had a couple of people ask that. Well, I need to hire a writer, but I'm not the one who can give this kind of feedback to the writers and train them and do that kind of stuff.
I mean, I don't know if anyone's going to want to hear this answer, but like, good luck is my answer. Like, how are you supposed to? How are you and I supposed to find a good coder? We don't know how to code.
Yeah.
And side note, we have wasted thousands of dollars basically being scammed by coders who didn't do anything in hindsight, as told to us by coders that did work out. Shout out to Chris Landon. He'll probably never watch this video, but like, he was like, guys, they didn't do anything. Like, none of this is useful. And I was like, what? We spent so much money on this. Anyway, I think that's the same. Is like you need to filter for it. Also, if you're not a writer and you can't filter for them, you have no business being like, "All these writers suck." It's like, well, then, like, if you can't give feedback, how are you going to say that? So if you think that that they suck, then that means you can give some feedback or do some filtering. So like maybe a big theme of this is like there's no shortcuts, at least that we have found.
Yeah.
To this.
Well,
now,
I think that's a big theme in just all of business. There's no shortcuts.
Yeah. The other thing that we have yet to talk about is this little like humorous analysis that you and I did beforehand, which is in terms of the background and experience. We labeled like I think 8 of our content strategists. Content strategist, someone who everyone started off as a writer, and they both had the interest and abilities to then extend on to just like managing our process and applying it to accounts. So including like picking keywords, doing the analytics, managing the client, like all that, right? And now they're writing or editing for their accounts is their choice. And it was an even 4-4 split of active content strategists between who had pre-existing, like significant pre-existing content marketing writing experience and who did not. So examples of like did not had it is like obvious. They were like writing for clients, or they had clients they're doing like content SEO blog type writing before. The ones that did not, it ranges anywhere from like pretty soon out of college, had random samples, worked in restaurant industry, in like domain trading at a bank, like people without like very little like professional writing experience. and they've worked out at the same clip. I mean, at least in our current active strategists, the same amount of them had like basically no content marketing writing experience as those that did. And so we were like, what do we make of this? And I think the answer is we seem grow and convert. We seem to be looking for and filtering for characteristics that I was talking about, like understand the value propositions, differentiators, comparative advantages of a product, features and benefits of product, and be able to communicate that and write that in a compelling, persuasive, so you can even argue salesy way, and have really clear thought and write it clearly and write clearly. That seems to not be a function of whether they're a content marketing like blogger or writer or not. Some that are also have worked out. Some that have not also have worked out. And those seem to be, it's like just this other trait. Behind the scenes, what we're working on is how do we use that to our advantage to find more good team members faster? We're talking about like other places we can put the application. Do we look in colleges? Like where else can we do it? And so that's something that we're still ongoing, and it honestly keeps me up at night where I like think about this. I'm like, okay, like there's clearly like when we find someone, not in a startup hub, like in America, then they're like they did something completely unrelated, but like someone in our team knew them and thought that they would be good or whatever, which has worked out really well for us, by the way. It makes me think like, my goodness, there must be tons of these people around that are working in other jobs that are smart and they have clarity of thought and they can communicate well and they can understand these products and features. And they would probably love to work here. How do we find them? Like, hello, like we exist. Please find us. And we can have a good working relationship, and probably you would love our job because it's amazing. So that's something that we're still working on, but that's something to keep in mind. Again, that may or may not be true for you. Maybe you're asking for a type of writing that existing content marketers do very well, and so maybe for you, it's you do want that experience. But that was a huge aha for us. It's people without a lot of experience have worked out really well. But it's not exclusive to them. I mean, existing content marketers that just don't have bad habits, have good habits, and are smart, like they also have worked out. So,
yeah, and I think the key thing there is just training then, because we're saying that people without experience and people with, well, I think the mistake that companies often make is that you assume if someone has experience that they're going to come in and be immediately successful at the role.
Right. But as we talked about, they may come in with bad habits that's not what you want from a writer.
Yeah, and so just from what we've learned overall is just you need to train everyone, because we have a specific process and way that we want things done. And if you're not communicating how you want things done and constantly making sure everyone's following the same process, then everyone's going to be doing things in a slightly different way, and it's not really going to work out. And what we're saying here instead is there needs to be a big, even after you find the right people, there needs to be a big focus on training them, because you need to train them in the way that you need things done for your business. And I feel like that's where a lot of businesses make a mistake, is they don't spend, even if they find the right person, they don't spend time afterwards making sure that this person's going to be successful in the role. And so maybe for the last 5 or so minutes, we just kind of want to talk through what we do on the training side. And I know there's no real big process around it, but I think even just kind of describing some of the back and forth, and I don't know if you have a few people in mind that, without naming names, of just where they started and kind of the iterations that they had to go through.
Yeah. So in terms of the flow, what Benji's talking about is we're talking about the last thing I was talking about, right? So in the training, like forget the right test project, forget, the things in the application. It's like now when they're writing, they're good enough to be like writing real client pieces with us. The feedback that we give them. Whew. 5 minutes, only 5 minutes. Like there's just so much that we've done.
You can go over a little if you want, but
yeah, I think the first thing that we haven't mentioned that I think is appropriate here is this clarity of thought that Olivia and I have gone back to for years, which is we realized our actual writing, like putting like the choice of words, our I don't know what we say, our desire there, like our goal, like what we're looking for there is actually very simple writing, non-flowery writing. And people have different like quirks and tendencies and all. And so we don't care about things like what people discuss on Twitter is nonsense, like Oxford comma and like all this like weird like writing. Like who cares? You're trying to like show up for content marketing, like SEO focus, you're trying to show up for a keyword and sell your product. Like who cares about Oxford commas and nonsense like that, right? So what we're looking for is clarity of thought. Forget selling even for a second. If I just had you listen to a 15-minute YouTube video on how a car engine works, like how good could you then write 2 paragraphs that summarize it to someone who doesn't know how car engine works? that that like that's just clarity of thought. Like can they understand it? And that's something that Livia and I have talked about a lot over the years of like, oh wow, it's not really about writing. And that's why I think people who haven't done it, people who started off doing surfing and they worked at a bank and they worked at a restaurant, like that's why they've worked out with us, because they can have clarity of thought. It's not about writing experience. It's like, can they just communicate things to you clearly, right? um and then yes, on paper, right? Like not just verbally. And so that is the number one thing. And so the coaching and feedback we give there is, they watch this video or whatever with some product manager that's explaining some feature that correlates with the keyword we're going after, and then they create the outline, and you see some issues with that thought structure in the outline, and you give them feedback, and it's like by video or whatever, and then maybe they're trying to write it, and then I've gotten on looms or videos and been like, no, you see, like we're talking about arguments and order and reasoning. That's a huge part of the feedback I've given like folks to the team all the time. Like, why would you mention that first? The reader is not with you yet. Like first this leads to that, leads to this, leads to that. Like just that, like getting them to think through that is a huge part of it. And then the second bucket is then the writing, like writing that without fluff. And I think a lot of people, a lot of writers I've noticed, and at least in our process and work, often the questionnaire and the outline has been awesome. And we're like, this is great. Like clarity of thought is there, the order of arguments, everything flows. You're like, this is really compelling. And then you get a piece back and you're like, what the hell just happened to that outline? Like, what is this? Like, it just turns into all kinds of nonsenses added. And I think a lot of people felt like the outline wasn't good enough because what they're used to, what clients want, what they think is good writing is like flowery and there's extra stuff and all this stuff. And we're like, no, like just clear, concise, say it in as few words as possible, as clearly as possible. So those maybe are the 2 buckets of coaching, is getting that clarity, and then the clarity of thought, and then writing it without in as few words as possible. I'd say maybe a third one, as I'm thinking through this, that you can add in is somewhere in there, like kind of the next step is compelling sales copy. Because we do bottom of the funnel type blog posts, people have equated it. David himself, that I talked about in this video, has said like, part of what we're doing is not really content marketing. It's like sales copywriting, because our posts are just selling our clients' products, because that's what converts really well. And so there is a bit of an art to that, right? Is you want to sell and be direct without, and be compelling without being too over the top, and like, you read something that's a little too salesy, you're like, oh, they're trying like way too hard to sell me this like window cleaning service or something, like. And so that there's some art form to that, and that's maybe the second tier level. But the biggest things we coach on is that clarity of thought. Can you just like break down the topic and explain how that car engine works well? And then the second one is, and do it without a bunch of like cruft in the writing.
I mean, I think we went through pretty much everything. Do
Yeah.
you want to summarize just kind of what we went
Yeah.
through in terms of the process?
Yeah, I think if you're looking to hire writers, in particular, if you've been frustrated at it, a few key big themes. Number one, in our experience, maybe some other people have solved this without work. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. You need to be closely monitoring and editing it. Number two, have multiple steps of filtering applicants by having them do exactly or as close to exactly as what you're going to want them to do in the real job as possible in the application process. And if you're asking them to do more than just like 10 minutes in the application form, pay them for that work. Paid test project. And then the next theme is then when they're even after that, as they're getting up to speed until they've just proven themselves as like outstanding, if you can afford it, if you have the time, the resources, the employees to do this, have people like carefully coaching and giving feedback on these pieces. It takes time.